So go to your system's application folder and then find the pgadmin app and then click on it. So it will open up the browser window and ask for a master password. So if this is your first time opening pgadmin, it will ask you to set up a master password. This password is not associated with your Postgres database account. So you can set any password that you want. And then next time you open up pgadmin, you will need to type this password to get in. So in my case, I already set it up. So I'll just type the password to get in. Once I get in, you can see that on the right-hand side is the servers panel. It shows all of my connected servers right now. Currently, I have only one server, which is the localhost server connected. And let me first remove this localhost, and I'm going to show you how to connect to server. So right now I have 0 servers connected. And what I'm going to do is to right click on the servers and then create server. This time I'm going to call it localhost, and then switch to the connection tab. And then the server name, host name is also localhost. And then port is 5432. And then maintenance database is Postgres. Should be tutorial, right? And then username is coding master. Then password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then check on save password if you want to save. And then click on save. So now, as you can see, we have successfully connected to the localhost server. And then expand the database tab. As you can see, we have the Postgres tutorial database connected. Okay, so as you can see, there are a bunch of stuff here under our database, but we only care about schemas for now. Schemas is where we create database tables. So expand schemas. Right now, I only have one schema, which is the public schema. This is created by default. So expand public and find tables. So right now we have 0 tables. And schemas kind of like associate with your application. So for example, you have one database, and then you have different applications connect to it. Each application corresponding to one schema. And then under that schema, it's all the tables that corresponding to that application. For example, if you have a blog application, and then you have so you create a schema called my blog, right? And then the database tables would be, you would have like a user table, an articles table, and then comments table, and then stuff like that, right? So you can think of schemas associated with your application, and then each tables inside of a schema corresponding to one object in your application. So now let's create a new table and see how this process works. So right click on tables and then create table. And then let's name it. I'm just gonna call it tutorial, and then tutorial, and then switch to the columns tab. So this is where you insert attributes of your objects. So let's add one. So click on this plus sign, and then I'm just gonna say ID, and then data type. ID should be integer, and you can just say int integer, and then length. There's no length. You don't have to specify a length, and then scale. If it's not null, well, yes. And then if this is primary key, yes. So what is the primary key? A primary key is pretty much the identifier of each individual items in your table. So primary key must be unique, must be not null. So it must has a value, it must be unique. So that's pretty much the primary key, and you can find these items with using this primary key, and there's only one item associated with it. So that's pretty much like an identifier, right? And then let's add another attribute. I'm gonna call it, let's say, name, and then data type should be string. I think it's actually called varchar, right? No, character varying. Yeah, so character varying. And then you can specify a length. I'm just gonna say like 128, and then not null. This is definitely not primary key, and if it's not null, yes, yeah, and that's it. Let's save that. So right now I have a tutorial table created, and expand columns. You can see that I have two columns. One is ID, and the other is name. If you want to see what's inside of this table, you can just click on this table name and then say view data, and then click on all rows. Well, there is no data in it, so you won't see anything, but you can see that this is the output. So now we're ready to inserting some data into this database table. And I'm gonna do that using SQL queries. Okay, so in order to write SQL queries in pgadmin, so right click on your table name and then select query tool. And then, so this is where you typically write your queries and run the query, and then it will display the output at the bottom. Okay. So in order to inserting data into our database table, we use the insert into command. So let's type insert into, and then follow with our table name. So in PostgreSQL, we need to first specify the schema name, which is, in our case, it's public, and dot our table name, which is tutorial, and then followed by a keyword called values, and then we enter the values that we wanted to enter, right? So, and we need to put the values around parentheses. So parentheses, and the first value should be our ID, right? And then we say ID start from 0, and then the second value is the name. It is a string, so we want it to be coding master, and then end with semicolon. So that's our complete query. And let's see if we can run this. Let's click on this button and then execute. So it says insert 01 success. Okay, let's check our table, and then let's click on this refresh button. And as you can see, we have insert one record. ID is 0 and name is coding master. Okay, so let's go back to our query editor, and then so this is how you typically inserting data. Okay, you start with inserting into, and followed by the table name, and then values, and then the values. The order actually matters. Okay, so the order in our table is ID and then name. So we need to follow that order, which is ID and then name. Okay, if you wanted to specify columns, that's also okay. So before the values is where we input, is where we enter the ID and then name. Okay, so that means the first value is ID and then second value is name. So this time I'm gonna change, say, John Doe. Okay, and then let's run the query. It says, well, there's an error. It says duplicate key value violates unique constraint to the primary key. So remember that we set the ID as our primary key. As you can see, it says PK, which means primary key. And I said primary key must be unique. So since we already have one record with the ID of 0, we cannot have another record with the ID of 0. So I must change these value to something else. Okay, this time I'm just gonna increment by 1, and then let's run the query. Success. Now let's go back and refresh our table. Now we have 2 records in it. Okay, so that's pretty much how we inserting data into tables. Okay, and then let's see how to actually getting data from the table. Now let's remove these query. So in order to getting data out of the table, we use the select command. So let's say select and then asterisk from the table that we want to select. So public dot tutorial. Okay, semicolon. And then let's execute the query. So as you can see, we select everything from our tutorial table. So asterisk means everything. So every field. Okay. So if I wanted to specify, I only want the names out of the table. So I can say select name from public.tutorial. Let's run that. So we only got the names. Okay, if I want to only select the IDs, I can say select ID from the table, and I only got the IDs. Or I can say select ID colon and then name, and then let's run it. So I got ID and name. If I'm being lazy, I want everything from the table, I can just type an asterisk and then run it. I got everything inside of the table. And we can also add conditions to our select query. Say I want to only select IDs equal to 0. Okay, I only want the record with the ID equals to 0. So to do that, we need the where clause. So where, right? So after the database name, we specify the where clause. So I can say where ID equal to 0. So let's run it. This time I only got the record with the ID of 0. Okay, and so this where clause could be anything. Okay, it could be where ID greater than 0. If I run it, I got ID is 1. I'm gonna teach more about the where clause, more complex where clause in the coming tutorials. But for now, just remember that we can specify conditions inside of our queries. Okay, so that's select, getting data out of the database table. Next, let's see how to update a record in our table. So let's remove that. In order to update a record, we use the update command. So let's see how to do that. Okay, so let's type update the database name, which is public.tutorial, and then we type set. So we use the set keyword to set the new value. Okay, so we want to set, say I wanted to change the name. Okay, so to set name equals say I wanted the name be John Smith, and then use the where clause to specify which record that I wanted to update. So where ID equal to 1. Okay, so I wanted to change the record with the ID of 1 its name to John Smith. Okay, so let's run the query. It says success. Okay, let's go back and then refresh our table. So now, as you can see, the ID of 1, the name becomes John Smith. Okay, so that's how to that's how you update your query. Okay, we can also specify update multiple records at the same time. I'm sorry, not records, multiple values. Okay, so I wanted to set name And then also I wanted to change the ID equals to 100. Okay. And then so let's set a new name. That would be, say, Jane Doe. And then where ID is 1. So let's run it. So success, go back to our table and refresh. So as you can see, this record becomes ID of 100 and name is Jane Doe. So that's how you use the update query, the very basic update query. And then next one is, of course, deleting data from the table. So let's remove update. All right, so in order to delete records, we use delete from, and then the database table, public dat, tutorial, where, right, which record that we wanted to delete, okay, where ID equals to 0. And then let's run it. So it deleted. Let's go back and refresh. Now, as you can see, the first record is gone. We only have one record now. So that's pretty much how you delete data.